My family turned their backs on me because I was the reason for her divorce. Years later, I received an email with proof that I was wrongly accused. I shared it with her, and it ended up ruining her life. My family cut me out of their lives and kicked me out of the house. I was 29, but I was only 22 at the time and didn't have the financial stability to rent an apartment on my own. What happened was so sudden that I didn't have time to prepare mentally. Or financially. The reason behind all of this was my sister, Hannah. She's 37, and I've never been close because of the significant age gap between us. She got married to her boyfriend, Pete, when she was 27. They were married for 3 years, but they got divorced 3 years into their marriage because Hannah had accused Pete of having an affair with one of my friends. I've been living with my parents since I started working. I was saving up to move out, and my parents were cool with that. But that was until my sister announced her divorce. She came home crying and said she'd filed for divorce because her husband had been cheating on her for 6 months. She also threw me under the bus for introducing my friend to him. My friend Emily, who's 28, was trying to gain weight, and since Pete was a certified dietitian, I agreed to help her out. I had been the one to introduce her to him, and apparently she was the one Pete had been cheating on my sister with. I was shocked that this was happening because even though Emily and I weren't close, I knew for a fact that she was a good woman and would never get with a married man. Besides, cheating was so out of character for Pete. He was totally smitten with Hannah and only ever had good things to say about her. So I found it incredibly hard to I had my doubts about whether he cheated on her. But my parents believed her instantly and didn't even question anything. Despite the lack of proof, they took her word for it. I don't blame them for believing her over me, though. They'd choose their daughter over their son-in-law, regardless of who was right. What I didn't understand was why they kicked me out just because Hannah said so. She just stormed in one day. She threw a tantrum and somehow convinced my parents to throw me out simply because I'd been the one to introduce Emily to Pete. She said I was ruining her marriage, and my parents agreed with her. I was devastated and tried to stop my parents, but they weren't ready to listen to me at all. They said that if I didn't leave, they'd kick me out in just one day. I'd lost my family and my home. I had no idea where I was going to go. I was so upset that I sat on the sidewalk for about an hour, crying. Then I went to a friend's house for the night. I called my friend every day for the next few days, but I didn't have any luck. My friend was kind enough to let me stay at his place until I found an apartment. Unfortunately, my parents had already made up their minds that I was in the wrong. I was the one responsible for my parents' divorce. They told me they were disgusted by what I'd done before kicking me out. It didn't make sense because I wasn't the one Pete cheated with. They'd blocked my number, so I couldn't get through to them at all. When I tried to visit them, my mom threatened to call the cops on me if I didn't leave. After that, I finally realized that they were serious about this and actually did blame me for whatever had happened. I don't think I had any reason to be surprised since my sister always had been the favorite child. My parents had never really planned for a second child, so I ended up always getting sidelined. While I didn't care much for it growing up, I didn't know that it would lead to something so huge. Thinking about it now, I guess I should have seen it coming, but honestly, I don't think anyone in my position could have foreseen this. I even tried to figure things out for myself for the next couple of weeks. Hannah and my parents had cut me off, and I had no way to get to them. I couldn't speak to Pete either because he blocked me too, which didn't make sense to me. I couldn't find him either because both Hannah and Pete had vacated the house they used to live in. I had no way to get through to anyone involved because they'd moved to live with their respective parents. That's why I decided to approach Emily, who I'd not been close to, as a last resort to get to the truth. I just asked to meet her one day and explain the situation to her. I asked her if what Hannah had said about the affair was true, and she denied it vehemently. I believed her. Emily told me that she'd only ever met Pete a few times and only in a professional capacity, so there was absolutely nothing going on between them. She had no idea why Hannah would say something so awful about her. She even told me that she'd had a steady boyfriend for a couple of years already and was planning to get married in a few months. She even showed me pictures, and what she told me was way more convincing than whatever Hannah had said. I had no proof, but I had a feeling that Hannah wasn't being completely honest about the reason for the divorce. Without proof, I couldn't go back to my family. I was pretty desperate to go back to living with my family, despite what they'd done to me. However, I was able to move on and find a place of my own. I made my job the purpose of my life. I needed something to distract me, and I also had to pay the bills. It was a better way of coping than just sitting around and being depressed. I didn't have any other option. I was hurting a lot, but I knew I had to go on somehow. I did, and I'm doing much better now. I've moved from my tiny apartment to a much bigger one, and I even got engaged to my girlfriend of 2 years. A week ago, our engagement post was a real game changer for me. Just a few days after that post, I received an email out of the blue that not only explained the whole story of Hannah's divorce and gave me all the answers I needed, but also had proof attached. My fiancée Liza, 30, usually only posts on Instagram, but the picture from our engagement made it to her Facebook feed as well, where she has a wider audience. It was a public post, and a lot of people saw it, including my ex-brother-in-law Pete. He'd met my fiancée at a seminar a few years back, and she'd added him on Facebook. That's how he found me. It really is a small world. For the first time, I was glad about it. He reached out to me a few days after we posted, but instead of texting me on social media, he decided to send me an anonymous email to explain that he'd been avoiding contacting me because it had been several years since his divorce, and he didn't want to seem like a sore loser who still hadn't managed to move on from what happened. He'd been the one to block me in the first place, so he felt weird and guilty about getting back in touch with me about something that happened so many years back. The email I received had the full story and proof of what had happened 7 years ago. I couldn't believe my eyes when I went through it. It turned out that my sister had been the one cheating on Pete, not the other way around like she'd been telling us for so long. Not only was that a huge lie, but it was even more interesting because she'd been cheating on Pete with a friend of mine, just like she'd accused him. My friend Frank is 28. I was a cashier at the grocery store near Hannah's house back then, and I never would have made the connection myself since I'd literally never seen them together. I guess they'd kept it well under wraps, but not enough for Pete to not find out. When Hannah was confronted, she told Pete that it was all my fault because I'd been the one to use her to Frank and had even told her about how he needed her help since he was an aspiring singer and she was actually a pretty good singer, and she agreed to help him, and bam. They fell in love before they knew it. She even said that I was involved, which helped them keep things under wraps for so long. Obviously, all of this was a complete lie. I had no idea that Frank and Hannah were involved. He was outraged when he found out and ended up blocking my entire family. He admits now that it was kinda stupid, but he was so angry that he hadn't given his actions much thought. He told me all of that in person since the email itself was meant to be as impersonal as possible. He didn't want it to be traced back to him. I did figure it out, though. The proof he'd attached were screenshots of emails between my sister and Frank. They were discussing how easy it is to fool Pete. They were full of confessions of love and plans for where they were going to meet next. There was no way she could deny any of this because she'd even signed off in the emails with her middle name, which not many people know. I had her dead to rights. I figured out that it must have been Pete who'd sent me this email after I looked through Lee's Facebook friends because I had a feeling that this was definitely related to social media. When I was finally able to find Pete on her list, I got in touch with him. We decided to meet a few days ago, and he told me that he'd found out about what Hannah had told her family from Emily, who'd met him a couple of years back. I told her to keep my side of the story a secret, and I was kicking myself for it when I realized that if I hadn't said that, she probably would have told Pete about it, and I would have been able to prove my innocence ages ago. Anyway, they'd run into each other a couple of times. A few years ago, she ended up asking him about the divorce, so they got to talking. Finally, he learned what Hannah had told us. He confessed that he wanted to talk to me about it and tell me the truth, but he didn't because he felt weird. I swear, if Pete wasn't so easily embarrassed, my life would have been a lot easier to deal with. I did forgive him, though, since I needed his help to absolutely destroy my sister, and I knew he'd be on board with it. Hannah had definitely been lying to my parents, so she'd have financial support during her divorce. She even threw me under the bus for good measure because she knew that one conversation with Emily and I'd know the truth. I couldn't wrap my head around the fact that someone, especially someone who was related to me by blood, could be this selfish. I'm sure she'd never bothered to set the record straight. My parents had just gone along with whatever lies she'd been telling them during her divorce. She'd known that if they found out she'd been the one cheating, she'd be in trouble. She just couldn't risk that. Well, it was finally out now, and I was going to use it to ruin her life just like she'd ruined mine all those years ago. I didn't know if my family still lived in the same house. I hadn't visited them for 7 years, but luckily for me they hadn't moved. I checked with an old neighbor before going over and was pleased to see that Hannah was still living with them. This wasn't a surprise to me because Hannah has always been lazy and hated doing any work herself. If she had the option of living with her aging parents and making them do all the chores for her, we showed up at their house without warning 2 days ago. My mom opened the door, and we barely gave her time to register what was happening before we walked in. My dad and Hannah were also there in the living room, and we were one happy family again. But it wasn't to last. My dad started threatening us right away and said he'd call the cops if we didn't get the hell out of his house. I shot back, but only after he'd read the documents we were about to show him. My parents looked confused, but Hannah seemed ready to throw up and excused herself to go to her room. I thought she was trying to escape, but there was no point in doing so. Pete went on to show the divorce documents and the screenshots of Hannah and Frank's emails while I explained the real story. Pete also told my parents how Hannah had to give up our family heirloom, my grandmother's diamond ring, in the settlement because she couldn't afford to pay him the money, since she's a high school teacher, so she had to sell the ring instead. My parents were already horrified by what we told them, and that was just the icing on the cake. We watched the drama unfold as my dad demanded an explanation from Hannah for all of it. That's what happened. When she still tried to lie and cover up the truth despite all the evidence against her, my dad kicked her out. He packed her stuff and handed over the bags to her. Then he told us all to leave their house. I didn't need to be told twice and left with Pete while my sister begged and pleaded with my parents to let her back in, just like I had all those years ago. This was karma at its best. I'm really happy about it. It's been a couple of days since then, and my sister showed up at my place a few hours ago, demanding that I make things right with my parents immediately. I didn't even know how she found me, but I told her that I didn't know her anything anymore. She'd ruined my life once, so I repaid her the favor. We were now on the same page, and I guess she really had no pride because as soon as I said, she started sobbing and accused me of being a monster. I wasn't in the mood for her drama, so I shut the door while she kept sobbing. I put my headphones on and listened to music while Liza, my fiancée, worked in her study. That way, neither of us would be disturbed. Hannah finally left us alone, but she left a message with a marker on my door to remind me that I was nothing but a revengeful monster. I don't see anything wrong with what I did. Frankly, I don't feel sorry at all. But Hannah seems pretty convinced that I'm the villain here. I just did to her what she'd done to me several years ago. The only difference is that I told the truth while she did nothing except lie and throw me under the bus. So what do you guys think about me ruining my sister's life and getting her kicked out 7 years after she accused me of causing her divorce? Just wanted to give you all a divorce update. Even though it's been a week since she got kicked out, Hannah is still bothering me. I had to threaten her with the fear of the cops when she called me for the 14th time today. That's when she stopped. I don't even know how she managed to find my phone number and address, but I'm not concerned about that right now. Hannah is trying to make me feel sympathetic towards her because I guess a school teacher's salary isn't enough for her to live on. I don't think her salary is enough for her to live on, but I could be wrong. She's probably just upset that she has to look for a place and pay for her own rent, electricity, and groceries now that our parents have kicked her out. I don't feel too sorry for her. In case you were wondering, I did block her number several times, but she's making her friends add me to conference calls, so there's no as for my parents, they're just as bad, if not worse than Hannah. They found me on Facebook and saw the post about my engagement, so now they want to be part of my life once more. They've even expressed their desire to attend my wedding. They haven't apologized yet, but they expect me to just invite them to my wedding, which is supposed to be a really important day for me. I don't understand where these people find the guts to say such ridiculous things. At least I'm not responding to any of it. Liza and I have been reading their texts nonstop because there's really no way there can be a real conversation right now. It's all just really sad for them. Hannah showed up at my house again after I threatened to report her for harassment yesterday. I was about to leave for work, but she stopped me by throwing herself across the hood of my car and refused to budge. It was pretty exasperating until I spoke to her. I ended up actually calling the police this time. They took her away while she screamed and cried and tried to show me as the bad guy. Unfortunately, nobody was buying her sad girl act. It took some time to press charges, but as soon as I got it done, I left for work because I didn't want to let this little incident ruin my day. I was sure my parents would bail her out. Anyway, she was their favorite and I turned out to be right. My parents sent me a lengthy text about how I was being too harsh on them for an honest mistake that they'd made almost a decade ago. It was hilarious because nothing about what my sister and parents had put me through was either honest or even a mistake. They knew what they were doing and were definitely aware of how cruel they were, but that didn't stop them from. I was thrown out onto the street despite having nowhere to go. Now that I can do the same to them, I don't see a reason to be forgiving and kind. I texted my parents back, saying that they'd lost any right to tell me what I could and couldn't do years ago. They'd better stop deluding themselves. I haven't blocked them yet since I haven't had the time to check my messages. I've been getting messages, but I'll be rid of this family for good soon. Update. I just got back from work and checked my socials. My parents had sent me another long message. Liza and I went through it together. It was the funniest thing I've ever read. They don't know I'm not hurt by what they say or do. I'm just laughing at how delusional and pathetic they are. Apparently, they still believe that we're family. They told me that they've taken Hannah back in with them and have decided that both their kids deserve a second chance. As if I'd ever been in the wrong at all. So, while they'd taken my sister back in, they also expected me and Liza to come to their house sometime soon for dinner. They wanted to sort out our differences in a civilized manner. It was pretty bold of them to assume that I'd even want them at my wedding in the first place. We had a good laugh about their stupid message, and then I wrote back saying that I wasn't interested in anything that they'd invited us to and was fine living away from them like I had for the past 7 years. They'd shown me that I was better off without them. I was forever going to be thankful for that. I didn't need them at all anymore, and I didn't want their so-called forgiveness so they could peacefully continue to play happy family with my sister like they had been so far with that last text. I blocked them once and for all because I didn't even want the laughs anymore. I was done and I was out. I'm sure they'll try to get back in touch with me one way or another soon, but I'm not having it. I'm sure they'll try to get in touch with me one way or another soon, but I'm not having it anymore. Liza is the only family I need now, and I'm happy with just her. My parents and my sister have unfortunately never been able to look beyond themselves, and I highly doubt that they ever will. So the next time they get in touch with me, they'll be speaking to my lawyer as well.